Welcome to Yorktown, 1781. Not actually, but we're going to pretend. This is Yorktown, Virginia. At the end of the Revolutionary War, the British had soldiers stationed here at Yorktown. They also had them up at New York. The Americans had planned on attacking at New York. The French were going to come, but the French were unable to have their ships stationed there, so they came down to Yorktown. You can see the bridge over there, right behind. That would be the harbor where the British and the French troops fought it out. Here, like a lot of places, almost every war is fought, at least in this area, on a farm. As you can see, there's a number of trees around. Obviously, it's going to be hard to fight through trees, especially if you're a open warfare, and you're going to want to have a place that has already been cleared. So they would set up their camp for the soldiers outside of the farmhouse, out on the fields. They're going to have their farmhouse is probably going to be commandeered by the general, whichever side got there first. You're going to have their fruits in their farm. You're going to have their vegetables, their cows, their chickens. You're going to have the food that they had there. You're pretty much going to take over. War is not necessarily nice. General von Steuben, remember that German guy who got kicked out of the German army for his preferences of lifestyle? He was the one that George Washington hired because he knew how to drill. He knew how to set up camps. He is the one that designed how a camp should be set up. You have the tents, which you've seen. You have the fire pit that they all ate around. All of the supplies were put in one section to make sure that they were easily accessed. This is the largest tent in the camp. This would have been the one where the officers would have stayed, where they would have met, made their plans, had their little meal outside of having to work with all of the other people, so they have time to themselves to think about how to win this war. All right, can you tell us what you got here?
Sure. This right here is a Smoothbore Flintlock Musket. And it has that name for a very particular reason. It's because it is smooth-bored, which means on the inside it is smooth. Now that's compared to a rifle, which has what's called rifling on the inside. It's the nice tight spiral. It spins the ball. It makes it go further, faster, and more accurate. This, though, this is a musket. This is not further, faster, nor more accurate. So what they're doing with this inaccurate weapon, they're doing what's called linear tactics, where they have everyone staying shoulder to shoulder next to each other, shooting all the other people staying shoulder to shoulder next to each other. I'll get more into that in just a second. The other part of this name is a Flintlock Musket. That's because it fires with this flintlock mechanism right here. There's a little piece of flint and a little piece of steel. So when I pull the trigger, you can see the flint hits the steel, creates a lot of sparks. Now, hopefully those sparks land in this little pan right here, where I've hopefully placed just the right amount of gunpowder. And hopefully that gunpowder ignites, hopefully burning through a little tiny hole right down there at the bottom. It's just 1 to 2 millimeters. Now, hopefully it burns that little tiny hole, hopefully setting off the main charge of gunpowder, hopefully burning through the paper that might be trapped on the inside, hopefully setting off the main charge, hopefully sending now a bullet that way, and hopefully hitting something. There's a lot of hoping that goes into firing one of these things, right? Probably wouldn't always go off, and that is another reason why they're using those linear tactics. Because again, if there's just one of me on the battlefield with this inaccurate weapon that doesn't always go off, there's a chance that it won't go off, and therefore 0% of the muskets that go off, and even if it does go off, there's a chance it won't hit anyone. But if there's 100 of me shooting at 100 of them, maybe about 9 or 10 of our muskets don't go off, still about 90% that do, and the chance that someone hits something is a lot better. So that's why they're using those linear tactics, because it's the best technology that they had at the time. They're using this musket instead of the more accurate rifle, because this musket can take about 15 to 20 seconds to load on a good day. The rifle, on the other hand, can take upwards of a minute to be able to load and fire. They decide when they're on the battlefield being shot at, that's more important to fire a lot of times each minute instead of just once a minute.
The rest of the farm, where the officers would have lived in the house, they would have taken over, probably sent the family to the loft, or else kicked them out altogether, depending on what side they were on, and they would take over the farm, they would take over the vegetable garden, they would take over everything, and when the battle was done, hopefully it was still standing. Back in 1781, Yorktown was a city, just like any other colonial city. Obviously, if you were a loyalist, you had no problem when the British came. The British came and took over the town. If you were a woman and your husband was off at war and you lived in Yorktown, you obviously couldn't move anywhere else. So the soldiers would have come in and taken over and lived in your house, and you probably would have moved up, just like they did in the farmhouses when the generals came in, and this would have been a British town at the time. This is Yorktown Harbor. So you can see this is where the river goes out to the Atlantic Ocean. So when the British troops came in and the French troops were there already, and then the French troops were around, the British were unable to get reinforcements to supply Cornwallis at Yorktown, where he is waiting right behind me. You have the French and the British are fighting in the middle of the harbor here, one on one side, one on the other, shooting each other with cannonballs. Very dramatic. So on the other side of those trees is the harbor, where the French fleet is keeping the British from aiding Cornwallis. The Americans and the French got together. Right here, the French took the British troops on the left side. The Americans took the British troops on the right side. They were able to overcome them, and they came up and were able to surround Cornwallis, which left nothing for him to do but surrender, which was the end of the American War for Independence and the beginning of the United States of America.